She's like a sickness in my brain, a vision standing by the window pane. She ripples through the blinds and leaves me in a daze. It's in the way her body moves me, the way she grabs me and intoxicates, until the signals in my mind forget to operate. In a fragile skull, I take my pleasure from my alcohol. She'll never give you any time at all. She just comes and goes, you know. And she's got me living in a chemical love, and I try to find the strength to know when she comes back to me again. I'm gonna come up from my hiding.
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me for another coffee and crime time. Today we're discussing the case of 16-year-old Leesa Marie Gray, who was kidnapped, assaulted, and tortured for hours by a 35-year-old man who was married. He was a Marine recruiter. He had a wife and a 2-year-old baby waiting at home for him, and I'm talking about Thomas Edwin Lowden. After hours of torture, Lowden suffocated and strangled Leesa to death before shoving her nude body under a seat in his van. And when I started going through the details of this case, I was really surprised that I'd never heard about it before, because the details of what happened to Leesa are horrific. And it seems like one of those cases that the media really latches onto and fixates on. But I also noticed that Leesa's abduction and murder happened just a few days, I think 5 or 4 days before the abduction of another 16-year-old girl, Molly Bish. And I know that Molly's case got a lot of national media attention, so Leesa may have gotten lost in the shuffle, but today we are focusing solely on Leesa. This is a really tough case, and I'm not pulling any punches, so strap in and get ready to go through these details and to be angry, because I'm angry. But before we dive into today's video, let's have a word from the sponsor, Native. I mean, where do I start with Native? You know I love Native and their products so much. I've been using their deodorant and body wash every single day and every single night for years, and I never want to use a different deodorant or body wash. That is a fact. And there's really so much to love about Native. Native's deodorants are made with familiar and simple ingredients that you know and love, such as coconut oil and shea butter. They're aluminum-free, paraben-free, cruelty-free, and vegan. And the great thing about Native's deodorants is they're non-sticky. They have a great texture. They go on smooth. They dry really fast. All you need is a couple swipes. And best of all, they keep me smelling sweet all day long with 72-hour odor protection, even after a full day of moving around, exercising, and sweating my butt off, sitting in front of these hot recording lights for hours. Some of my favorite scents this month, I mean, they're pretty much kind of consistently staying the same. I love my OG scents like cherry vanilla macaron. Citrus and herbal musk is a must try, but I'm really loving the honey and white oak that I tried for the first time last month. It has become pretty much the deodorant I put on every single day because it's so mild and so clean smelling, and I just love it. But Native also always has these special edition scents. For instance, they recently released their Candy Shop collection of obnoxiously craveable Candy Shop-inspired scents like strawberry and vanilla taffy, which happens to be my personal favorite out of that collection. I have it right here. I love it in the deodorant, 1,000,000%. It smells so good, like real fresh strawberries. So delicious. But they also have gummy bear scent, sweet cinnamon heart scent, and sour berry belt. And honestly, I know it sounds like I don't have much of a life, but I'm always looking forward to see what new scents Native will roll out every time they introduce a new collection, which they do several times a year. And I honestly don't know how they do it. I don't know how Native does this and makes all of the scents of their products smell so real and not artificial at all. But the scents in their deodorants and their body washes and their lotions are just absolutely amazing. Fresh, light, beautiful. Native has a sensitive range of deodorants that's made with coconut oil and magnesium oxide, which is derived from the Dead Sea instead of baking soda. And Native also offers a plastic-free version of their deodorant, and the plastic-free version has the same great formula inside of it. It's just in a more sustainable packaging, and the plastic-free packaging is 100% plastic-free and earth-friendly. And as always, Native does have the best deodorants, but they have so much else to offer. They've got the best body wash I've ever used in matching scents to the deodorant, okay? I talk about the body wash all the time, but amazing. They have lotions too. They have all of these personal care products, and you can kind of like mix and match or get all matching scents. Now, right now, if you click the link in the description box and use code StephanieH31, you can get 20% off your first purchase at Native. This offer is available site-wide. That means you can use it on anything, but only for a limited time. So stock up and save right now. I know I will be. Once again, click the link in the description box. Use code StephanieH31 to get 20% off your first purchase at Native. And thank you so much to Native for sponsoring this video. Let's dive in. On the evening of June 22nd, 2000, 16-year-old Leesa Marie Gray left her shift as a waitress at a family diner. Leesa lived with her mother, Wanda Ferris, her stepfather, Mike Ferris, and her little brother, 10-year-old James Ferris, just 2 miles from Comer's restaurant where she worked. And this was an establishment that was actually owned and operated by Leesa's uncle, Mike. Leesa's mother, Wanda, also served tables at Comer's a few nights a week, and Leesa was planning on taking as many shifts as she could during the summer between her junior year and senior year at Itawamba Agricultural High School. Leesa was a typical 16-year-old girl living in small-town Dorsey, Mississippi, a place where residents prided themselves on their small-town charm to the point where a tourism brochure promised that Itawamba County was a place where everyone knows your name. Now, going into her senior year of high school, Leesa was still best friends with a girl she'd met on her first day of kindergarten, a girl who was also named Leesa, and this is how they initially bonded. They had the same name. When you're 6, that's all it takes, For 6-year-olds, you can form a lifelong bond in kindergarten just because you share the same name. Best friend Leesa remembered how close she and Leesa Marie had been. The two girls would get ready for school dances together, their families went on vacations together, or they went on each other's family vacations. They'd even recently taken their senior pictures together. Leesa said that she and Leesa Marie loved dancing to Shania Twain, but in the car before church, they would often sit together alone and blast the Spice Girls, who they could only enjoy in private because liking the Spice Girls at that time wasn't cool. Leesa Marie wanted to be an elementary school teacher one day. She wanted to get married and start a family. And Leesa may have been a small-town girl who enjoyed the simpler things in life, but that doesn't mean she didn't have big dreams. She was the vice president of her junior class, and according to MississippiToday.org, she was a member of many groups that reflected her many interests. She sang in chorus. She was a part of Juniorettes and Future Educators of America, as well as Future Business Leaders of America. And she was the secretary of DECA, the Competitive Student Business Organization. Outside of school, Leesa didn't have time to get into trouble or get involved in drinking or drugs because she was an active member at the Bethel Baptist Church, where she wholeheartedly threw herself into her position in the church youth group, as well as, being an enthusiastic member of the church choir. She loved to sing. A friend of Leesa's, Rebecca Herbert, remembered that when she moved to Dorsey in 1998, she was so nervous because she didn't know anyone. But when she walked into church, Leesa Marie Gray was the first person to greet her and welcome her to town. Rebecca said, quote, "The next day at school, she introduced me around. She's the sweetest girl I know. It's hard to replace someone like that." End quote. Leesa's school principal, Pete McMurray, also remarked on how sweet and pure Leesa was, saying, quote, "Her greatest legacy is her heartwarming smile. I can close my eyes and still see her." End quote. And obviously, Leesa's mother, Wanda, was incredibly proud of her beautiful, kind-hearted, and driven daughter, saying, quote, "She was pretty happy-go-lucky, always smiling. That's what I most remember her by, is her smile. She loved life. She was a good Christian girl. She wasn't perfect now, mind you, but she strived to do right. God couldn't have given me a better daughter." End quote. And I have to pause here for a moment and give a huge shout out to Leesa's mother, Wanda. I can't begin to imagine the immeasurable, impossible strength it takes to go through what she's gone through. And I know for a fact that the person who did this, Edwin Loden, the person who did this to Leesa, continued to torture her family in the aftermath of stealing Leesa from them. And Wanda took everything head on with a strength and a sureness I'm not sure I could ever muster or match. It's hard to understand, but also inspiring at the same time when these parents of these children, who are missing or have been brutally murdered, how they find the strength to keep fighting, how they find the strength to keep talking about their child. Like, it's just so hard to wrap your head around. Everyone who knew Leesa said the same things. She loved life. She was just a happy kid who worked hard for a future that she deserved to live. But on June 22nd, when Leesa arrived at Comer's restaurant at 2 p.m. for her shift serving tables, she didn't know this was going to be her last shift. She didn't know that she was going to die that night. And this family restaurant, Comer's, mostly served regulars, locals, people who knew Leesa, who knew her family, and were happy to see Leesa and her smile as she approached their tables. But that afternoon, a customer came in who hadn't been seen around those parts in quite some time. 35-year-old Thomas Edwin Loden was an 18-year veteran of the United States Marine Corps, and in 2000, he was working as a recruiter in Vicksburg, Mississippi, where he lived with his wife and his 2-year-old daughter. Even though he lived over 200 miles away, Eddie Loden had grown up in Itawamba County, and he came from a very well-respected and prominent family in that area, to the point where a road was named after them, Loden Road. It runs through Ballardsville. Eddie Loden's grandmother, Rena Loden, was still living on the 175-acre family farm located on Baldwinsville Church Road near Dorsey, and his Aunt Myrtle lived just a few streets over, and she would sometimes do the sewing for Leesa Marie Gray's family. And that just kind of shows you this was truly a small town where everyone knew everyone, but not a lot of people knew or remembered Eddie Loden, who had joined the Marine Corps right after graduating from Itawamba Agricultural High School in 1982. Loden would go on to serve on the front lines during the Gulf War. He'd be selected as outstanding recruit and honor man of his platoon, and his commanding officers described him as the poster boy of the U.S. Marine Corps. So all of his performance reviews were always glowing, and Loden was constantly being recommended for promotions within the military. By 1992, he was an E-7 gunnery sergeant, and he'd been awarded numerous medals, including the Good Conduct Medal 5 times, the Navy Marine Corps Achievement Medal 3 times, and the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal twice. In 1995, Loden married a woman named Kathleen, who went by Kat, and in 1999, he attended recruiter school, hoping for an assignment that would bring him closer to home. He'd been assigned to work in Vicksburg as a recruiter, and he had been working that job since October of 1998, but he'd gotten a 10-day leave in June of 2000 because his grandmother, Rena, her health had been slowly deteriorating. She was getting up there in years, and at that point, she was being cared for full-time by a live-in nurse. So Eddie Loden wanted to check in on his grandmother and spend some time with her, and it was the perfect situation because his grandmother still had his old bedroom set up from when he had used to live with her. On June 21st, 2000, Eddie Loden traveled from Vicksburg to his family farm, a 6-hour drive, and the next day after waking up, Loden went to Comer's restaurant for lunch, where witnesses claimed he attempted to flirt with 16-year-old Leesa, who rebuked his advances. Basically, she just wasn't having it. It's not specific what he said or what she said, but people felt like they could see that he was kind of hitting on her, kind of getting familiar, and she sort of backed off, and her body language was like, nah. But according to those who saw her that day, this little interaction during the lunchtime rush, it hadn't gotten Leesa down. Her mother, Wanda, had stopped in around 6 p.m. that night for pie and coffee and to talk with Leesa about plans to go visit her aunt in Gulfport that weekend. And Wanda said that Leesa was in a great mood, even more bright and bubbly than usual. Later that night around closing time, Leesa's stepfather, Mike Ferris, and her little brother, James, also stopped in to say hello. And at that time, Leesa was wiping down tables and getting the place ready to lock up for the night. But there was one more customer who was able to slide in right before the kitchen closed. And this was Eddie Loden, who pulled into the parking lot of Comer's around 9 p.m. that night, and he parked his 1994 two-toned Ford conversion van right next to Leesa's 1992 green Honda Accord. He went inside and ordered a cheeseburger to go, and then he went back outside and he stood next to his van. Actually, he stood between his van and Leesa's car. And later it would be discovered that while he was there, shielded from sight between the two vehicles, he knelt down and buried a utility knife into the front passenger side tire of Leesa's car. And then he broke the handle off, so only the blade was left in the tread. And an outsider, somebody who's just looking at the tire from the outside, they wouldn't see that anything was wrong with it. Loden then went back inside the restaurant where he got his cheeseburger to go, and then he left. Or at least that's what he wanted the people inside of Comer's to believe. It's actually theorized or speculated that Loden parked his van in the next parking lot over where he could sit and watch and wait for Leesa to leave. And while he was doing this, he ate his burger and he called his wife, Kat, who was at home in Vicksburg with their young daughter. Leesa Marie Gray finished with her work and left Comer's a little bit after 10 p.m. that night. She got into her car and started driving. She didn't make it far before she realized she had a flat tire, and she had to pull over on the side of the road about a half mile from the restaurant, and she pulled over on Dorsey School Road. And this was an area that she should have felt safe in. She was a 5-minute drive from her house, and according to David Sheffield, who was with the Itawamba County Sheriff's Office, quote, she was on a highway where all the homes were owned by friends and relatives, end quote. Once again, small town. Everyone knows everyone. This is a place where Leesa should have felt okay about getting a flat tire, knowing that probably somebody she knew and trusted would be driving by any minute and would help her. It just happened to be the unfortunate circumstance that this flat tire wasn't a fluke. It wasn't an accident. It had been purposely created by Edwin Loden, and he had followed Leesa when she left, waiting for her to have to pull over. So literally within probably seconds or a couple of minutes of her pulling over, it wasn't some friendly, neighbor or, person she knew from school or person that she knew from the restaurant who stopped and asked her if she needed help. It was the person who had caused the flat tire, who had a nefarious reason for wanting to get her alone on the side of the road. We don't know exactly what happened to Leesa from that point. But when she didn't arrive home by 10:45 p.m., her mother, Wanda, became worried. Like I said, only a 10-minute tops drive from the restaurant to Leesa's house. So Wanda started calling around to see if anyone knew where her daughter was. And one of these calls that she made was to the cook at Comer's restaurant. This was a man named Richard Talent. And Richard said he remembered Leesa leaving work at the normal time, but he also remembered when he was driving home, he passed a car that had its hazards on and flashing on the side of the road at the intersection of Highway 178 and Dorsey School Road. So Richie Talent, he drove back to the spot where he'd seen the car, and he found that the car was still there. Its hazard lights were flashing ominously, the doors were unlocked, and the passenger door had been left slightly ajar. And on the passenger seat, Richie Talent saw Leesa's cell phone and purse. And Richie also noticed that the car had a flat tire. So he called Wanda, who is Leesa's mother, and Mike Ferris, who's Leesa's stepfather, and he told them what he had discovered. He said he found Leesa's car, her phone, her purse, but not her. So Wanda and Mike, they left right away. They met Richie at that location, and while Mike inspected the tire and began the process of changing it, Wanda drove a little bit up the road a ways, assuming that Leesa had started walking home after she got the flat tire. But there was no Leesa up the road. She wasn't walking home. She wasn't there to turn around and flash a sheepish smile as her mother pulled up behind her. She was gone. And as Leesa's stepfather, Mike, pulled the flat tire off of her car, he realized that the tire had the blade of a utility knife shoved in as far as it could go. So they called the police, feeling that something wasn't right. And David Sheffield, who was the first law enforcement official on the scene, agreed, saying, quote, "As soon as I got there, I felt it was an abduction," end quote. Now, the first thing the police did was sort of split into two task forces or two groups. One group went out looking for Leesa. The other group began an investigation by questioning the customers who had been at Comer's that day and that night. They asked these people if they'd seen Leesa. They also asked who else had been in the restaurant, and they did this with the intention of systematically questioning all the patrons in an effort to find out if any of them had seen something weird or unusual, out of the ordinary. Because the clientele of Comer's was usually locals and regulars, several of the customers mentioned seeing somebody that it wasn't typical to see at Comer's, and that was Eddie Loden. And Richard Talent, the Comer's cook, he told police that he'd gone to high school with Eddie and that Eddie had actually been in twice that day, once for lunch and once right before closing. And each time he had arrived at the restaurant, he'd been in two different vehicles. When he'd come earlier in the afternoon, he'd been driving a 1988 beige Oldsmobile Regency, which ended up being his grandmother Raina's vehicle. And when he came right before closing, he'd been driving a full-sized two-toned green van. Richie Talent said that he knew Loden was in town visiting his grandmother, so detectives went to Rena Loden's house and they knocked on the door. And listen, at first they weren't overly suspicious of Eddie Loden. They just wanted to question everyone who'd been at the restaurant that night. When they knocked on the door of the Loden family farm, a woman named Joyce Brewer answered. She was actually Rena Loden's full-time caregiver, so like her nurse. And Joyce said that Eddie Loden was home, but he was asleep. So the police were like, okay, no problem. We just have a couple of questions. We'll come back later. The police left, and they continued tracking down and questioning customers who'd been at Comer's the previous night, the night that Leesa Marie Gray had gone missing. And then they returned later when Eddie Loden was the last name they had on their list. They'd already talked to all the other customers. They just needed to talk to him. Now, on this return trip, one of the police officers, Officer Jones, noted in his report that he saw a green van parked in the driveway of Rena Loden's home. The back windows of the van were tinted and the doors were locked, but through the front window, Officer Jones could see a pair of dirty boots and dirty work gloves between the front and middle seats. So this kind of piqued his interest, and he was like, what's going on here? Like, this is the last person we have to talk to. I'm getting a little bit more suspicious of Eddie Loden. So when they knocked on the door this time, they actually were able to talk to Eddie's grandmother, Rena Loden, and she told the police that her grandson Eddie was home, but the last she knew, he'd gone out to go fishing in the pond, which was located a few hundred yards behind her house. So the police trekked out there to the pond, but they saw no fishing gear, and they saw no Eddie Loden. So they returned to the house. And at this point, they asked Rena Loden, who was in a wheelchair at the time, do you think we can check the rest of your property? And can we check the inside of your house? And can we check inside your Oldsmobile? And Rena gave her permission. Inside Rena's car, police located a rope fashioned into a handcuff-style knot. And on the floor of Eddie Loden's bedroom, they found a pair of shorts with what appeared to be blood on them. Based on this evidence, Loden became a person of interest, and a manhunt began for him when they figured out he wasn't anywhere in the house or on the property. And the police were able to get a search warrant, which included a more thorough kind of search of the property and the home. But also, this search warrant allowed the police to search Eddie Loden's green van. And so the van was towed to the Highway Patrol headquarters in New Albany, Mississippi, where it was secured until someone from the Mississippi Crime Lab could arrive. It didn't take long to find Eddie Loden. And if you're interested in my opinion, he wanted to be found. That's just my opinion. He definitely wanted to be found. Remember, the police had been there earlier, and they'd been told by Rena's nurse that he was home, but he was asleep. And then when they came back a few hours later, Eddie was gone. That means he woke up and he knew that the cops had been there bright and early that morning. He knew why they were there, and he knew that they would be back and they'd be looking for him. So he took off and he did something dramatic, okay? He was found that afternoon stumbling along a dirt road not far from his grandmother's house, bleeding from self-inflicted wounds to his wrist and from the injuries he'd given himself when he'd carved the words, "I'm sorry," into his chest. Loden was rushed to the hospital to be treated, and while there, he was questioned about Leesa Marie Gray briefly. And Loden said he didn't know where Leesa was. He didn't know anything about her. He didn't even know who she was. and he denied any involvement in her disappearance. But almost at that exact same time, when Eddie Loden was like, I don't know what you're talking about, Leesa Marie Gray, who, a crime lab tech, had popped open Eddie Loden's van and was discovering a treasure trove of horrors. Leesa's nude and battered body was found, shoved under a fold-down back seat. And just like that, the world knew that this bubbly and happy 16-year-old girl was no longer missing. There wasn't hope that she would come home and hug her parents. There wasn't hope that she would come home and be able to start her senior year and graduate and go to college. She was gone forever. Also recovered from Loden's van was a JVC camcorder, and inside that camcorder was a compact video cassette. Now, what is on that videotape has only been seen by very few people, and those people wish they could unsee it. Those people wish that they could wipe its contents from their brains forever. What I'm going to describe to you about this video is the tip of the iceberg. It's not the worst of what happened to her, because honestly, I don't want to really go into the worst that happened to her. I mean, it's pretty bad what I'm going to tell you, okay? It's bad enough. Obviously, there's more horrible things, because this videotape showed footage of 16-year-old Leesa Marie Gray being repeatedly raped for 4 hours in the back of Eddie Loden's green van. Loden forced Leesa to perform oral sex on him. He used a cucumber to repeatedly penetrate her. He told her to smile so that he could see her braces. He made fun of her for being a virgin. Like, you can hear him on the video saying, oh, you really were a virgin after all, and like laughing and saying things like that. I mean, I have not seen the video, but that is how it was described. There's a short break in the video before the picture returns. And this time on the video, you can see Eddie Loden pinching Leesa hard on her chest in an attempt to wake her up. I don't know if at this point in the video she was already dead or if she just passed out from the pain and the terror, but he was pinching her on her breasts hard over and over and saying, like, wake up, wake up. The last scene on the videotape showed Leesa's dead body propped up and posed in the van, a cucumber still inserted inside of her, and Loden used this cucumber to continue to assault Leesa, as well as assault her in other ways, even after she had died on the video. This is all shown on the video. And then the video thankfully stops. Now, Eddie Loden's face is never seen on this video. You know, he's going to try to say it's not him because you can't see his face, but his voice can be clearly heard, taunting Leesa cruelly and with glee. Not only that, it's his van. And there was like quilts and comforters and stuff that were identified as being his. So they knew it was him. There's no doubt it couldn't possibly be anybody else. And crime scene technicians also recovered the cucumber that Loden had used on Leesa. It was still in the van, and they performed a DNA test on it. Besides Leesa Marie Gray's DNA, they found a minor DNA profile on the cucumber, which matched to Eddie Loden. So Loden was arrested as soon as he was released from the hospital, and the next day the police got another search warrant for the property of Rena Loden. And as they searched the grounds, they found a freshly dug grave approximately 20 feet into the woods on the Loden family farm. This grave was in a well-hidden and heavily vegetated area, and next to it was a shovel. So, like, here's what happened if you want to know what I think. This Eddie dude, he kills Leesa. He's got to hide her body. He shoves it under the seat just so nobody can see it. And then he grabs a shovel and he goes out and he digs this grave, probably either very early in the morning before he went to sleep, or maybe after he got up and found out the police had been there. But either way, he dug this grave planning to put Lisa's body in it. But once he heard the police were there and that they were coming back, he was like, okay, what do I do? Like, I got to figure out some way to like not get in trouble, basically. Like, what can I do? I truly believe that he faked taking his own life, probably didn't cut himself that deeply, probably didn't, do it in the correct way, specifically so that people would feel bad for him and maybe, he'd have some time in the hospital and they wouldn't arrest him, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe he really was hoping to die. I wish he had. But either way, I don't think that was his plan the whole time. And I don't think that he was sorry, even though it was carved into his chest. I don't think he was sorry. So after being jailed, Eddie Loden received a visit from his wife, Kat. And after speaking to her husband, Kat told the police that Loden wanted to make a statement where he would admit to the rape of Leesa Marie Gray, but he was continuing to deny the murder. So he tried to do this for a little while. Like, yeah, I did have sex with her, but it was consensual and I didn't kill her. But it's like, what are you talking about? Like, we have the videotape. So it wouldn't be long before Eddie Loden would finally admit, yes, he had killed Leesa, but he said he hadn't done it on purpose. He claimed that Leesa had been rude to him when he had driven by her car on the side of the road with a flat tire, and he had pulled over to help her change her tire. And he'd said to her, like, don't worry, I'm a Marine, little lady, and this is what we do. And then he suggested that maybe Leesa might want to join the Marine Corps. And he claims that Leesa responded, that's the last thing I'd want to do with my life. And this made him so angry, he ordered her into his van, drove her to his grandmother's house, and made her pay for her disrespect. For the record, I don't believe that story at all. I think that he saw her, probably Eddie Loden saw Leesa at Comer's earlier in the afternoon when he was there for lunch. He thought she was pretty. He developed like a crush on her. He flirted with her. And when she rejected him, he got pissed. And that's what he wanted to make her pay for. First of all, I cannot see someone like Leesa being so outright like rude to an adult. All the adults who knew her pastor, her teachers, her principal, her parents, they all said she was a very nice girl, very respectful. There'd be no reason for her to be like, ew, the Marines, that's the last thing I'd want to do. Like, no, she's not going to do that. Second of all, I don't see somebody getting that angry about a teenager being like mouthy and being like, ew, the Marines, like, pass. And you're so angry about that as a 35-year-old man that you're like, that's it, get in the van. I'm going to make you pay for this. Like, it's so stupid. It just shows you the level of stupidity that this man holds, the level of, I think, delusion that he holds, because he keeps thinking that if he does these things, and it's going to become a pattern, if he does these little things and takes all these little side roads, that it's going to somehow make things better for him, instead of just like walking the path that you have now created for yourself and taking responsibility for what you did. Like, dude, it's ridiculous. It's on videotape. You videotaped it and then left the videotape in your van, but you thought, this bitch is locked up, these police can't get in here, so I'm just going to put everything in here, the body, the cucumber, the freaking videotape, the boots and the gloves, which were dirty, which I assume he wore when he dug the grave. Like, everything's going to be in this like little vault of this van and the police can't get in. But they found your bloody shorts on the floor of your bedroom. And listen, Leesa was choked and suffocated to death. So the blood wasn't from her murder. It was from her rape. They found those shorts in your bedroom. They found, some suspicious things. You were the last person to that they talked to who'd been at Comer's, and you were the only like outlier. You were the only kind of out-of-towner person who wasn't local. So it made sense that they were going to get a warrant for his van before he had a chance to hide that stuff, but I don't think he thought that they would get it that quickly. On November 21st, 2000, Thomas Edwin Loden was indicted for capital murder during the commission of a kidnapping, rape, and 4 counts of sexual battery. And Loden was assigned a public defender, James P. Johnstone, and he pleaded not guilty to all charges, which, once again, this is bananas to me, because he'd made this big show of pretending to take his own life. He carved the words, "I'm sorry," into his chest. Well, if you're pleading not guilty, what are you sorry for? What did you write "I'm sorry" for on your chest and try to take your own life for if you didn't do it? And you confessed to the cops, right? But he's saying oh, that confession was coerced. He's going to try to use that too. But come on, man. There's videotape evidence. You confessed and you wrote "I'm sorry" with a knife on your chest. What else do we need, right? So Somehow, he still drags this out for years. In January of 2001, attorney David Lee Daniels began assisting Loden's defense team, and Daniels was formally appointed as co-counsel in February of 2001, and the defense team filed numerous motions, including a change of venue for the trial, which Judge Thomas Gardner did approve. Gardner also granted the defense request for funds to hire a DNA expert, a criminal defense investigator, and the funds to pay for Eddie Loden to be evaluated by a team of mental health professionals at the Mississippi State Hospital. Loden was evaluated by 2 psychiatrists and 1 psychologist at the hospital, and their opinions on him were unanimous. They claimed that Eddie Loden would have known the nature and quality of his acts at the time he committed them. He would have also known that they were wrong. They also said that in their opinions, Loden wasn't experiencing any extreme emotional or mental disturbances at the time of his crimes. And although they acknowledged certain trauma that he had in his life, such as claims he made that he'd been physically and sexually abused as a child and that he was suffering from PTSD after serving the Gulf War, these mental health professionals didn't believe that these factors rose to the level of being exculpatory or even the levels of mitigation. So there's going to be 2 terms that I'm using in this video, and they connect to each other, so I want to explain them. When someone's convicted of a crime, a judge will weigh specific aggravating or mitigating factors in order to decide what kind of sentence the defendant will receive. Aggravating factors are circumstances that increase the defendant's culpability. These are factors that lead to an enhanced or a maximum sentence. Aggravating factors might be something like a previous criminal history or the defendant committing their crime in a particularly cruel, destructive, or vindictive manner. Like if you tortured someone for 4 hours and then slowly killed them, that would be considered an aggravating factor. That would be considered overkill, especially cruel. Mitigating factors are extenuating circumstances that could lead to a reduced sentence. For instance, whether the defendant was the primary offender or just an accessory, whether the defendant was acting under duress, or if they had past abuse that would lead to criminal conduct or a mental illness, things like that. Basically, a judge will have to weigh those things. Column A, column B. Aggravating factors, mitigating factors. Which sentence should we give this person based on these factors? And I don't necessarily agree with all the things that the legal system considers to be mitigating factors, but I'm just telling you how it is. If you believe Eddie Loden, he had the worst life ever. And it was because of this that he shouldn't be held as responsible for what he did to Leesa. Now, for me, this goes back to an issue of accountability, because a lot of us have stuff in our pasts that wasn't ideal, but we really can't set a precedent for murderers to be able to use that stuff to get less severe sentences. It sends a message, the wrong message. It's not great where we've come now in the legal system, in the justice system, where someone can just be like, well, I had a shitty life and people treated me really poorly, so I grew up and started, murdering people horribly. And I shouldn't get that much time in prison because of what happened to me in my past. The only reason I believe it's not a super good argument is because hundreds and thousands and millions of people suffer from trauma in their childhoods and in their life. They suffer from abuse. They suffer from neglect. They suffer from, pain, mental, physical, emotional. A lot of people, a lot of horrendous things happen to a lot of people. Look at the guy who wrote A Child Called It, If you're aware of that book, it's like basically a testament of his constant child abuse. His mother tortured him for years. Did this dude grow up, kidnap a 16-year-old girl, rape her repeatedly, and torture her for 4 hours before slowly suffocating and strangling her to death? No. Not everyone who has bad things happen to them go on to do bad things to other people. So it's not really a super valid excuse, in my opinion. And I'm going to give you a detailed list of what Eddie Loden believed to be mitigating factors in his case in a moment. But just understand that he told these mental health professionals at the state hospital all of his stuff. And they all decided that those factors did not rise to the level of being exculpatory or mitigating. And remember, this was a psychological evaluation that his team paid for, his defense team paid for. So you can imagine that when they received the final reports, they were not super happy about it. These were obviously not the results that they wanted. They needed someone that they could pay for the right opinion. So they went back to the court and they asked for more money to hire an independent psychologist, Dr. C. Gerald O'Brien. Eddie Loden was evaluated by Dr. O'Brien on August 13th, 2001. Dr. O'Brien concluded that Loden was under the influence of extreme emotional and mental disturbances and distress at the time of the murder. So no surprise there that he would say that, right? The other 3 mental health professionals, 2 psychiatrists and a psychologist, are like, yeah, like he had stress, like work stress, relationship stress, as do most people who are living and breathing air at this moment. But we don't believe that it was, severe enough or extreme enough to explain or excuse why he did this. But Dr. O'Brien also ended up giving the opinion that this distress most likely didn't raise to the level of where anyone could say Eddie Loden didn't know the nature of his crimes and didn't know the difference between right and wrong. Eddie knew what he was doing, and he knew what he was doing was wrong. And that says a lot, because usually when a defense team hires a private mental health professional like this for a psychological evaluation, that person's going to say whatever the hell the defense team wants them to say for that payday. But Dr. O'Brien was like, yeah, he was under more like stress than these other mental health professionals gave him credit for, but I still don't think it rose to the level where he didn't know the difference between right and wrong. Eddie Loden also said something interesting to Dr. O'Brien. He said that he didn't want to receive a sentence of life in prison. He wanted to plead guilty so that he would get the death penalty because he felt bad about what he had done. He felt that's what he deserved, and he wanted to save everyone the time and the pain of a trial, which honestly, if he meant this, I would give him huge props. It wouldn't change anything, right? He'd still be a murderer, but I would respect that. It would be more respectful to bow out gracefully, to take accountability, to not try and run away from what you've done or avoid the consequences that you deserve. So like I said, I'd respect that if he meant it, but every single thing he did before and after he said this would suggest otherwise. Dr. O'Brien ruled that Eddie Loden was competent to stand trial and assist in his own defense, and a trial was scheduled for October 8th, 2001. But even though Eddie Loden had told Dr. O'Brien that he was going to plead guilty and he wanted the death penalty and he was going to, take his medicine like a good boy, it really wasn't reflected in his actions because his defense team was really busy filing and preparing pretrial motions to suppress all of this stuff from the investigation. They wanted to suppress Eddie Loden's confession to the police. They wanted to suppress the evidence found at the home of Loden's grandmother, Raina. And these motions were obviously denied by the judge, who was like, okay, guys, this is ludicrous. I gave you a change of venue. I gave you all this money to hire all these mental health experts, and you didn't get what you wanted from them. So I had to keep giving you more money. But this is ludicrous. The confession stands, and the evidence found during the, execution of the search warrant also stands. And Eddie Loden had a hard time with his suppression motions being denied. Like, he literally couldn't fathom it. He was actually, his mind was blown by it. He didn't understand how anybody could think that he'd willingly given a confession, and how anybody could think that his grandmother was in the right state of mind to allow the cops to search her property. So in August of 2001, Eddie Loden spent a lot of time communicating back and forth with his attorney, James Johnstone. And Loden wanted Johnstone to file a motion with the court requesting that they reconsider the validity of the search warrant, which had turned up the evidence used to arrest and charge Loden. And basically, if they reversed the search warrant and they said that wasn't done constitutionally, then basically the charges wouldn't stand. And Loden said to his lawyer, if this motion's unsuccessful, then we'll talk about, entering a plea of guilty. And then we'll also talk about the appeals process. Now, this is important because usually when you plead guilty to capital murder and you're sentenced, there's no appeal at that point. You can appeal your death sentence, but it's usually very difficult once you've confessed and taken a plea deal, and you haven't had a jury trial. It's usually not looked upon fondly if you would like to appeal that after, obviously, because you yourself took the plea and confessed. Now, this is important to know that his thought process is going through this because Loden is trying to set something up with his lawyers even before he pleaded guilty. Loden said in this correspondence that he was sure he would get the death penalty, and he says it like it's a positive thing, and it's confusing. And Loden wanted Johnstone to tell him, in his professional opinion, whether or not there was a chance of an appeal. Loden wrote, quote, "With all I've told you and shown you again, your opinion on appeal chances," end quote. This may seem confusing and counterintuitive to you because it didn't make sense to me when I first read it. I'm like, why does he seem like he's sure he's going to get the death penalty and that's a good thing, right? But then I kept digging and researching and I figured it out. Because you wouldn't be saying you want to plead guilty and you're sure you would get the death penalty, but then wonder if you'd be able to appeal because according to what Loden told Dr. O'Brien, he wanted to plead guilty. And he wanted to get the death penalty because he felt true remorse for what he had done and he didn't want to continue dragging Lisa's family and everyone else through all of this pain. Now, this case would never make it to trial, right? Because Loden would plead guilty. He met with his attorneys for a total of 21 hours on 3 consecutive days before making a court appearance on September 21st, 2001. This was 17 days before his trial was scheduled to start. And on this day, Eddie Loden pleaded guilty to all 6 counts that he'd been charged with, and he waived his rights to a jury trial and waived his rights to a jury sentencing. And he's asked, when he's saying this to the court and to the judge, "Are you sure? Do you understand what you're doing? Do you know what this means? Et cetera, et cetera. Like, do you understand that if you do this, you're waiving like your constitutional rights to a jury trial? Do you understand that this means you won't be able to appeal this decision, et cetera, et cetera?" And he always answered, "Yes, I'm sure. Yes, I know." They asked him this stuff over and over again. So the trial was canceled and Loden went right into sentencing. At the sentencing hearing, the prosecution presented its case as to what the aggravating factors in the murder were, because this is the time when the judge would be weighing these aggravating and mitigating factors before deciding what kind of sentence Eddie Loden would receive. The prosecution wanted Eddie to get the death penalty. And several experts testified for the prosecution about the torture that Leesa would have experienced, not just in the last moments of her life, but the last hours. This wasn't a quick or merciful death. A forensic pathologist testified that Leesa Marie Gray was in fact a virgin when she was brutally raped over and over and over again. And it was clear that Loden had done everything in his power to make her as afraid and hopeless as he possibly could, responding very cruelly to her pleas for help and mercy, sometimes ignoring those pleas completely and just continuing on with what he was doing even more brutally. Loden's defense team initially said they wouldn't be offering evidence to show the mitigating circumstances. But then they did ask for permission to discuss the mitigating circumstances out loud without bringing in expert witnesses of their own, even though they paid for them. They were like, I know we're not going to we're not asking for anything. We're not asking for a reduction in sentence, but we just want to talk about some of these mitigating circumstances, just in case anybody's interested. So the defense lawyers said that Eddie Loden had been sexually and physically abused as a child. They said he had served for over 18 years as a decorated Marine. He'd gone to war for his country. He suffered from PTSD after combat, and he experienced frequent nightmares following his time fighting in the war. They also said he was having marital problems, and he had exhibited suicidal behavior before and after he killed Leesa, and he had been drunk and on drugs on the night of the murder. Eddie Loden would later claim that his lawyers hadn't discussed all the trauma that he told them he'd gone through, and they hadn't spoken specifically about the mitigating factors that they did address, like they just briefly talked about them. For the record, I believe that Eddie Loden was exaggerating the extent of the bad things that had happened to him in life because most of the stuff he would elaborate on wasn't found in his lawyer's notes or in the notes of the mental health professionals who evaluated him, which means he didn't tell them all of this other dramatic stuff that he came up with later when he was appealing his death penalty, basically, when he's appealing his sentence. So I think he ended up just making everything sound worse, hoping that this would give him, grounds for an appeal, hoping that he could get a break. For instance, Loden said that he witnessed his father, who was a drunk, physically and sexually abusing his mother. And Loden said that at the age of 2, he and his 4-year-old sister had been left alone for several days. He said his parents were both unfaithful to each other. They'd gone through a bitter divorce, and the woman that his father would go on to marry was abusive towards both Eddie and his sister. Loden also claims he was sexually abused by a male church employee while attending a vacation Bible school. He said that this same employee was also molesting another child at the vacation Bible school, a girl, and this employee forced Eddie and this other girl to have sex with each other, and the molestation and sexual abuse continued for 2 years. Loden said that he eventually went to live with his mother at the age of 10, and her husband abused him and neglected him. And Loden claimed that he, his 3 siblings, and their mother all suffered from substance abuse as a result of childhood trauma. Loden's defense team said, quote, "We've been able to develop that Mr. Loden has had childhood history of extreme sexual child abuse himself, that in spite of that, he was an exemplary student, that he served in the U.S. Marine with distinction for 18 years, that he attained the rank of E7, that he was highly decorated and a combat veteran in Desert Storm. He has no criminal history prior to today. The expert clinical psychologist that was appointed for the defense by the court, Dr. Gerald O'Brien, would have been offered as an expert in the field of clinical psychology. Dr. O'Brien opines that at the time of the crimes, Mr. Loden was not capable of appreciating the criminality of his conduct, and that he was also incapable of conforming his conduct to the requirement of the law. And finally, that at the time of the crimes, he was suffering from extreme mental and emotional disturbance. Notwithstanding, Mr. Loden has elected to, and had instructed us that he desires to waive presentation of this mitigation evidence for reasons I feel he will explain to the court when given an opportunity to make a statement," end quote. Which is ridiculous, dude. Oh, our client, he told us that he doesn't want us to talk about this stuff, that he feels justifies this murder. But we're going to do it anyways, but he didn't want us to. He's trying to look, Eddie Loden's trying to look like this guy who's doing the right thing, but he's not. He's not that guy, and he's not doing the right thing. Although the defense team claimed they weren't going to make a big deal about mitigating circumstances and Loden was ready to face the music, they ended up submitting the report from Dr. Gerald O'Brien. In response to that, the prosecution submitted the reports from the 3 mental health professionals at the Mississippi State Hospital. The state was not messing around. They were very clear that what Loden had done to Leesa was above and beyond anything that could be mitigated basically by anything. It didn't matter what happened to him in his past. What he did to that girl couldn't be explained away or lessened by anything that had happened to him. So the state pushed for the death penalty, and the judge agreed, sentencing Eddie Loden to be put to death by lethal injection, agreeing with prosecution that the aggravating circumstances far outweighed any mitigating circumstances. Now, at this point, you would think that Eddie Loden would just go on to prison and wait until his execution date, because that's what he wanted, right? Remember, he wanted the death penalty. He wanted to take accountability and save everybody the, pain of a trial. But it turns out that wasn't what he actually wanted. By agreeing to plead guilty and get the death penalty, he wasn't doing the right thing. He was hoping that, first of all, this would make him look better in the eyes of the judge, who would be the one to inevitably decide the sentence. And Eddie also hoped it would give him a chance to appeal his sentence and his conviction, right? You can usually, you can appeal your sentence. If you've taken a plea and you got the death penalty, you can appeal and say, I don't think I should have the death penalty, and here's why. But you can't, really appeal your conviction at that point, because you confessed and took a plea deal. And I guess he really didn't take a plea deal because he didn't get much of anything in return. But he confessed and pleaded guilty of his own accord, of his own free will. So in February of 2002, Loden filed a motion for leave to file an out-of-time appeal. And in July of 2003, the Office of Capital Defense Counsel filed a motion to vacate Loden's guilty plea, claiming he'd only agreed to plead guilty because of bad advice he'd gotten from his legal team at the time. Eddie Loden said that he'd been told by his lawyers that if he pleaded guilty and got sentenced to death, they could appeal, and then his case would be heard by the Mississippi Supreme Court. And this would benefit Loden because He said he was feeling so discouraged after the suppression issues had been decided against him, and he'd been told that the Supreme Court would give a more careful look at his case because they did that with death penalty cases, and they would hopefully see that, the suppression issues being ruled against him had been unconstitutional, even though a judge had already decided that they weren't. And I mean, we know that they weren't unconstitutional. Eddie Loden clearly confessed to killing Leesa Marie Gray even before he was in court, even before he was behind bars. He gave his confession to the police. So he was hoping that this would go to the Mississippi Supreme Court and they would be like, what? He shouldn't even be here. He shouldn't have even been arrested based on what they have. Overturned, let this guy go home. And Loden was really rolling the dice there. If that's what he wants us to believe, that he pleaded guilty and asked to be put to death, banking on the slim chance that the Supreme Court, the Mississippi Supreme Court, would find that the suppression issues should have been upheld. Like, he's really rolling the dice. I don't know what's wrong with him, but under cross-examination during this appeal hearing, Loden admitted that initially he had wanted to be put to death because he wanted the case to be over with as quickly as possible. He felt bad. He didn't want to keep putting everyone through it. But he claimed that once he had time to think and heal, and he was better emotionally and mentally, he changed his mind. He decided he wanted to live. He also admitted that his lawyers had told him they were ready to go to trial if that's what he wanted. And they'd been clear with him that if he pleaded guilty, he wouldn't really have the ability to appeal his conviction. But he figured that once his case went to the Mississippi Supreme Court, they would see things his way regardless. It almost makes me wonder, based on how prevalent his family was in the area, if maybe he knew somebody or his family knew somebody on the Mississippi Supreme Court, or somebody in law enforcement, that he was kind of hoping, like, once it went out of the hands of this court and into the hands of another court, that person could kind of swoop in and pull strings to make things go his way. Because honestly, like, other than that, if that's not the case, he was really playing fast and loose with his life. So Eddie Loden told the judge that he was going through a lot at the time of the murder, and these stressors had sent him to a dark place where he knew not what he did. He said that when the U.S. Marine Corps had assigned him to the recruiting office in Vicksburg, they pretty much left him to his own devices, even though they knew he was suffering from PTSD. But then in another breath, he says he never reported that he was suffering from PTSD to his superiors in the military because he thought it would prevent him from getting promotions. So that's not true. Like, first of all, I don't think he suffered from PTSD. He definitely didn't report it, and I'm not sure what he thought the Marine Corps was supposed to do to help him with his PTSD when he didn't tell anyone about it. Loden also said that he and his wife, Kat, who was his third wife, by the way, that was his third marriage. He was 35 and on his third marriage. That's crazy to me. But he said they were having a hard time in their relationship. He said she'd been having affairs for a long time, and sometimes Loden would even participate in threesomes with her just to keep her happy. Once again, I don't believe this. Now, shortly before Leesa's murder, Kat had started working as a paralegal in a swanky and prestigious law firm, and she and one of the partners of this law firm had gotten close. And Loden claimed that on the night of Leesa's murder, when he had called Kat at 9:30 p.m., while he was waiting for Leesa to leave work so he could stalk her, he said his wife had told him on the phone that she was planning to sleep with this man, this partner at the law firm. On top of that, Loden said that when he'd arrived at his grandmother's farm, he found it falling apart. He found his grandmother's health declining, and all of this stuff had stressed him out so bad. So he'd taken a few shots of bourbon. He'd, drank some beer, ingested some other non-specific drugs throughout the day of the murder that he never, actually says what drugs, or we never have proof that he had drugs in his system. And that's what put him in a mindset where he was able to do what he did to Leesa Marie Gray. Loden also introduced a report from Dr. James High, MD, who had interviewed Eddie Loden after his conviction. And Dr. High had concluded that Eddie suffered from chronic and complex PTSD, along with borderline personality disorder and dissociative amnesia. Dr. High also claimed that Loden had been suffering from these disorders at the time of Leesa's murder, and the various work and family pressures pressures that Loden was under, on top of the fear that his wife was going to leave him for another man who had a more prestigious job, this triggered an acute episode of dissociative amnesia along with his borderline personality disorder. First of all, none of the other 4 mental health professionals who analyzed Eddie Loden came to these conclusions, all right? And if Eddie Loden had this amnesia and couldn't remember basically like stalking and hunting Leesa and then hurting her, why did he carve "I'm sorry" into his chest and then try to take his own life, you know? Obviously, this was just a waste of everybody's time. It was just a waste of everybody's time. I also remember reading something in the report where they were like, Dr. High's specialty wasn't ever given to us, so we assume he's a psychologist. And I did find somebody who seems to be about the right age working in California by the same name, who is a psychologist. But like, I don't know what kind of psychologist you are, Dr. High, when 4 other mental health professionals didn't come up with, borderline personality disorder and dissociative amnesia, but you're the one who was able to find those things in him. And also, I don't like this, okay? I don't like this because borderline personality disorder sucks. It sucks to have it. It sucks to deal with somebody who has it. It already sucks enough. And to suggest that someone would commit a crime like this because of their borderline personality disorder, it's offensive. It's offensive. At the end of the day, the court, the judge, they were on the same page. They were like, you had some shit go down in your life, noted, but you kidnapped and brutally raped an innocent 16-year-old girl over the course of 4 hours, and you videotaped it. You suffocated her. You strangled her. You continued to abuse her body after she died, and then you shoved it under the seat of your van like Leesa was garbage. Even if we had known all of these extraneous variables, like the fact that your self-esteem is so low and you're so pathetic and your grasp on your own masculinity is so loose that the idea of your wife leaving you for a better man made you lash out and take your anger out on an innocent 16-year-old girl, we still would have sentenced you to death. Thank you. Next. I think that we should look into unsolved disappearances and unsolved sexual assaults and murders on young women in this area from that time. Because in my opinion, this was not his first murder. This was not his first attack, okay? As much as his defense team wanted to be like, he has no criminal record. Like, no criminal record doesn't mean you haven't committed a crime. It just means you haven't been caught. And I just don't see how somebody who's completely normal, has no issues, has no violence, has no signs of like red flags, how they go from being like completely normal to doing that. You know what I mean? Like, to doing what was done to Leesa Marie Gray, which anybody objectively can say was horrific and unnecessary. I just don't see how a person could have a compulsion to do that and an idea to think that they could possibly get away with it and not have attempted it before. Okay, so I would look in that area and see if there was something along those lines, if there's a lot of missing girls or a lot of girls who were found dead and had been sexually abused or raped. I would look in that area for those kinds of cases, honestly. So Eddie Loden's execution was scheduled for December 14th, 2022, just at the end of this past year. It was set for 6 p.m., and he was pronounced dead by 6:12 p.m. Eddie Loden received lethal injection, and hours before his death, he visited with family and friends, and he had his final meal, which consisted of 2 fried bone-in pork chops, a baked sweet potato, fried okra, Pillsbury Grand biscuits with butter and molasses, peach cobbler with French vanilla ice cream, and Lipton sweet tea. And reportedly, he was quite upbeat, and he ate very heartily, and he wanted more sweets and more sugars. One of the guards said like he had gone through the dessert and he wanted more sweets and more sugar, and the guard was like, I had candy, and I ended up giving it to him because like he just wanted more. You know, what do I think about people on death row getting whatever last meal that they want? I guess I am in favor of it. But did Leesa Marie Gray get her choice of a last meal? No, because she didn't even know it was her last day. She didn't get her choice. I mean, what if she was so busy that day and she was so hungry and she was like, I'm so busy, I got so many tables, I don't have time to eat. As I've done as a server many times, I don't have time to eat, I'll eat when I get home. And she didn't even get any last meal. Or what if her last meal had been like a pack of crackers that comes with soup just because she was so hungry? Leesa didn't get her choice of a last meal. She didn't get to chow down on pork chops and peach cobbler and French vanilla ice cream and Lipton sweet tea. So what do I feel about last meals? Like, I don't know. Like, generally I'd be in favor of them because, I mean, you're about to die and should have something. But to think about what happened to Leesa, how she died, how terrified she was, how scared, how she probably just wished somebody would come and find her and help her. And this went on for 4 hours. To think about that. And then to think about like, yeah, is dying by lethal injection super pleasant? No, it's not super pleasant. But is it as bad as what happened to Leesa? No, it's not. So Eddie Loden got this huge last meal, and he got to die by lethal injection, which was not the torture for 4 hours that he put Leesa through. So Eddie Loden was 58 at the time that he was put to death. And his final statement, he said, quote, I would like to express to the Gray family and anyone else I hurt how deeply remorseful I am for everything I did. I know these are mere words and cannot erase the damage I did. For the last 20 years, I've tried to do one good deed every single day to replace the loss my actions took from this world. If nothing, I hope you get peace and a closure. I mean, he's so full of shit. For the past 20 years, every day, he repeatedly tried to get out of trouble. He repeatedly appealed his conviction and his death sentence and tried to basically like just avoid paying the price for his crime. So like, I don't believe he's actually remorseful, and I don't know what good deeds he was doing, but trust me when I say I don't need to know what good deeds he was doing to know that they didn't replace what he had taken from the world and what he had done to Leesa. I mean, even in October of 2022, when the Attorney General at that time had set a date finally for his execution, because the Attorney General at that time, I forget, it's a woman, Lynn Fitch. She was like, yo, okay, we've been putting this off long enough. Like, enough with the appeals, enough with the bullshit. This dude needs to go. Even then, he was still trying to appeal his conviction, and he like basically did like this class action lawsuit with some other death row prisoners to be like, oh, you gotta hold off on the execution because the chemical you're using is like outlawed or something. It was just basically like a Hail Mary. Oh, and get this. Oh my God, this pisses me off so much. This woman, Mitzi Magleby. Mitzi Magleby. Doesn't even sound like a real name. Mitzi Magleby. She's a spokesperson for the Mississippi chapter of Ignite Justice, an organization that advocates for criminal justice reform. She told one of the papers who was covering Loden's execution, she said, quote, clearly something in him snapped for him to commit such a horrific crime. Mr. Loden was immediately remorseful. Shouldn't there be room for grace and mercy in such a situation? End quote. All due respect, Mitzi, fuck off. Fuck off. If that was your daughter, you wouldn't be saying that. That's what pisses me off the most about people like this, okay? Because it's easy to preach forgiveness and people can change and stuff like that. It's very easy when you have not personally been affected by the crime this person committed. And if you haven't personally been affected by the crime this person committed, shut your mouth. You have no place to talk. You don't get to have an opinion about it. You don't. Shut up, Mitzi, you idiot. And that's the thing. Like, I get it. People can change. I don't disagree that people can change and do change when it's convenient for them, right? Every single member of the Manson family who had committed these horrific murders in the 60s, they all changed when they were in prison. You know, they all found God. They all became like productive members of their prison community. And so what? I don't care. I don't care. You had a chance to be a good person and you had a chance to do the right thing. And honestly, I don't think that Eddie Loden was out of his mind. I don't think he snapped because his wife was going to sleep with someone else. I don't think any of that happened. I think he saw Leesa, wanted to have sex with her. She said no, declined his invitation. He got pissed and had this compulsion to just take what he wanted, you know, like so many others have. And yeah, I don't have any pity for him, and I'm glad that he's dead. But now I turn it over to you. What do you all think about this case? What do you think about what happened to Leesa? What do you think about, what ended up happening to Eddie Loden? Do you believe that he was remorseful? I mean, Mitzi over here, idiot Mitzi, says he was immediately remorseful. Why, Mitzi? Why do you think he was immediately remorseful? Because he wrote, "I'm sorry" on his chest and then did everything to convince anybody he talked to that he was not responsible for whatever happened to Leesa? Is that him showing immediate remorse to you? You dumbass. Like, Mitzi, man. Freaking Mitzi. All right, we're done. Don't forget to like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't already, because a lot of you are watching and not subscribed. Share the video if you think it's worth sharing. Throw a comment in to the comment section. Let me know what you think. Chat with me a little bit. Thank you so much for being here. Stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe, and I'll see you very, very soon. Bye.
Straight down, and that river runs deep. The mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They coming back from the grave, calling out my name. Better say I Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's killing you slowly. So you got to let it go. I got blood.